Warning. This edition of Where Did the Road Go may contain hidden messages, but probably not. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following awesome individuals: Greg Ross, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Yvonne Williams, and Michael Friske. Thank you so much for helping make this show possible.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am here with a returning Robert Guffey. Hello, Robert.
Hello.
And you have a new book again.
I have a new book again. Yes.
Hollywood Haunts the World. This is the first book since your Expected Mother book, right?
The Expected Mother Disinformation Handbook, which, by the way, has been nominated for a Wonderland Award, which is given out every year around this time of the year at the Bizarro Con in Oregon. That will be, we'll find out if it wins later this month. Cool. And then since then, I had Camellia has been published in its first time in Spanish.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
The first foreign translation of Camellia was published just a few months ago. So there are people in Spain who are discovering Camellia for the first time. If you have an urge to read Camellia in Spanish, you can now do that. And then Hollywood Haunts the World came out just a couple of days ago. And in a few weeks from now, my very first comic book is coming out. It's called The Upside Down Magician, which is a reference to the major arcana of the tarot.
The Hanged Man.
And yes. And it's coming from Burning Tarot Press, which is an independent operation. This is my first experiment in self-publishing. Me and my collaborator, who's a brilliant artist named Nadim, who lives in Canada. And we did this together. This is issue number 1 of what will be an ongoing series. And it's a comic book about paintings, sentient houses, Hieronymus Bosch, government agents, secret societies, and many other things that we can't yet understand. And it's Nadim, the artist, will be at Expozine in Montreal on November 15th and 16th. I don't know. I doubt this will air before then, but he'll be selling copies of the comic book there. But if you look at my website, cryptoscatology.com, I'll be posting information about how to order issue 1 of the Upside Down Magician. And that's and I did have a novella, The Land of Thieves and Phantoms, that was published in an anthology called Becoming Nosferatu, which was a collection of stories inspired by the German expressionist films of the 20s. And that was co-edited by Gary Rhodes, who you had on the show talking about his book several months ago. So that's what I've been up to since the last time, since Expected Mother Disinformation Handbook was published last Halloween.
You are just a writing maniac.
Yes. Hollywood Haunts the World, I started writing that probably in 2009, I think, or 2010. Okay. So I've been working on it for well over 10 years.
Now, what's the subtitle to it?
It's Hollywood Haunts the World, an investigation into the cinema of occulted taboos.
And what does that mean?
Well, it's all about, I became fascinated by the idea of fiction has always been the most effective way to deal with societal taboos in a way that won't get the creators arrested or killed. And film has been the most popular venue for fiction for almost 100 years or more.
Yeah.
And in fact, this book covers 100 years of cinema. So it begins in 1921 with a film called The Phantom Carriage, directed by Victor Sjostrom, which is a little known but very influential film. It influenced Stanley Kubrick, if you watch The Shining, you can see connections between The Shining and The Phantom Carriage. Charlie Chaplin said The Phantom Carriage was the greatest film ever made when it came out in 1921. And so it goes from The Phantom Carriage in 1921 all the way to 2021. And I think chronologically, the last film covered in the book is Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley. And I decided to create that 100-year window just so that I wouldn't keep going on and on. I figured, okay, if I just say it's 100 years, then I won't have to do anything after 2021. Otherwise, the book would just never end.
Right.
But I deal with a number of different topics that could not be discussed in polite society, but were examined in the context of these popular films. So there's 9 chapters, and the book goes backwards in time chronologically. It starts out with the most recent films, and then goes backwards to 1921. And so, like, there's one chapter that deals entirely with what I call Darwinian horror films. There's a whole slew of films from the silent era, 1920, really going all the way up to the early 60s, that deal with the theory of evolution. And of course, it didn't stop being illegal to teach the theory of evolution in schools until 1968, due to a Supreme Court decision. So the Supreme Court of 1968 was much different from the Supreme Court of 2025. But
right.
The 1925 Scopes Monkey trial was important, but that didn't immediately overturn these laws. So if you were teaching the theory of evolution in certain areas of the United States, even in as late as 1967, you might have gotten into a lot of trouble. So you couldn't do a movie in the early 30s, say, about the theory of evolution. You couldn't have a character advocating, Darwin's theory. So you have instead these kind of horror films that deal with the topic in this metaphorical way, disguised behind genre trappings, even in the 20s. And some of these films are lost to us. I mean, we only know about them through stills or synopses, but Lon Chaney Sr. Did a film called The Blind Bargain in 1922 that dealt with this, with Darwin. A lot of films with scientists doing experiments on apes. In a lot of these films, for some reason, apes are having sex with women. I mean, you're not seeing that, but it's suggested. It's suggested that this is what's going on. And I focus primarily on Murders in the Rue Morgue from 1932, which is directed by Robert Florey and stars Bela Lugosi. And Robert Florey was originally supposed to direct Frankenstein, the one that eventually stars Boris Karloff. But famously, Bela Lugosi, who had just done Dracula, which was a huge hit, the Universal cast Bela Lugosi as the monster. And Bela Lugosi wanted to play Dr. Frankenstein. He was very insulted that they were giving him a role that had no dialogue. So Bela Lugosi turns down that role, and Universal moves Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi over to Murders in the Rue Morgue, the adaptation of the Edgar Allan Poe story. And instead, James Whale and Boris Karloff do Frankenstein. By the way, this brief tangent, Guillermo del Toro just came out with his version of Frankenstein, which I recommend. I think it's unfortunate that most people will see it on Netflix on a television screen, when if a film ever needed to be seen on a large screen, it's certainly del Toro's version of Frankenstein.
Why?
Well, I mean, it's just, all of del Toro's films are visually impressive, and certainly this film is as well. And I would say that it's definitely more faithful to the spirit of Mary Shelley's original novel than previous adaptations. It's certainly more faithful than the James Whale version or the Hammer version from the 50s with Christopher Lee, or the Kenneth Branagh version from the early 90s. But I've heard some people were complaining because it deviates from the original novel, but that's like every single Frankenstein adaptation deviates dramatically from the original Mary Shelley novel. And I would argue that Del Toro's version deviates less so, though it certainly does deviate dramatically as well. This is another tangent, but you might find this interesting. If you go back and read the original Mary Shelley Frankenstein, there's one element that I think you could do a lot with, but it's never been really exploited in any adaptation I've seen. I've probably seen over 100 different adaptations of Frankenstein in form of either stage plays or operas or comic books or radio adaptations and film and TV shows. It's a story that is adapted to film in a major way at least every 10 years. And then in between, you have these kind of odd variations on it that are kind of unofficial adaptations. I mean, even Jurassic Park is a Frankenstein story in its own way. In fact, there's a new movie coming out just in a few months. Maggie Gyllenhaal is doing a film called The Bride, which is like Frankenstein monster and the Bride of Frankenstein, almost as Bonnie and Clyde, on the run from the authorities. And I think that was originally supposed to come out in October, but they probably realized that the Del Toro film was going to overshadow that. So I think they pushed it back to early 2026. So you're constantly, I mean, Frankenstein, it's almost like Hamlet, like somewhere in the world, there's some version of Hamlet being staged somewhere on planet Earth at any given moment. And Frankenstein, there almost seems to be some variation on Frankenstein being adapted in some form every year. But in the original Shelley novel, Mary Shelley, who was, of course, 18, 19 when she wrote it, her father was William Godwin, widely regarded as being the first, having written the first anarchist manifesto. And then her mother, who died soon after she was born, widely regarded as having written the first feminist manifesto. She grows up in this environment of other writers and artists. She actually sat on William Blake's knee. This was an unusual childhood. And she runs off with Percy Shelley, who was a married man. And she runs off with Percy Shelley. And of course, she's hanging out with Lord Byron, who was probably as close as you get to a rock star in the 1800s. She's in this intensely intellectual environment. And it's interesting that she has Victor leave home and he goes to university. And the university she has him go to is the University at Ingolstadt, which, of course, is where Adam Weishaupt formed the Illuminati. And in the book, we only know that it's taking place in 17 .. We don't get an exact year, but it's in the 1700s. So it could be the exact same time period where Weishaupt is forming the Illuminati. And when Victor comes to the university, he meets two different professors who are kind of like the Mulder and Scully at the University of Ingolstadt. One professor is a super rationalist, very much into modern day science. And he dismisses Victor's interest in the ancient arts of alchemy and the Hermetic sciences. There's another professor who's actually very interested in the old sciences, the old ways of the Hermetic alchemical experiments, etc., and encourages Victor's interest in this. So the monster, it's implied, it kind of comes about due to a merging of the most recent cutting edge advances in science with galvanism and electricity, merging that with the ancient forms of alchemy. And Mary Shelley never tells us exactly what Victor does to create the monster, but it's implied because he's going to graveyards and stealing bodies and bringing them back to his garret. In the 1931 James Whale version, we have to visualize this somehow. So he shows us a being that has been stitched together from various body parts, which very much kind of turns Mary Shelley's original theme upside down, because it's really suggested that he has created a whole new being from this kind of protoplasm that he has collected from all this flesh and spare body parts stolen from charnel houses and graveyards, that he has created a completely new being. It's not a creature that has been stitched together, but a completely new type of creature that's why it's like a child. It doesn't possess a brain of a criminal brain or anything like that. It's a whole new being. And the theme of the book is not that science is bad, but that the way that Victor treats the monster is what makes him into a monster.
Right.
Whereas the theme of many of the films is there are things that man were not meant to know. There are things that we should not even attempt to know or learn, which really does. And even though the James Whale, Boris Karloff version is the cinematic classic, it does turn Shelley's theme completely upside down. So that's why I say I think the Del Toro version is certainly much more faithful to Shelley's version, though it also deviates. But I just think it's interesting that Shelley, who of course is married to Percy Shelley, was very interested in the occult. Her father is William Godwin, who later writes a book called Lives of the Necromancers, a nonfiction work about these ancient alchemists and occultists. She was obviously very familiar with all this type of information. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that she has Victor go to the University of Ingolstadt, where Weishaupt was forming his Illuminati in the 1700s. I think she was definitely tapping into all that when writing Frankenstein. But so that was a total tangent. But maybe not. Because in Murders in the Rue Morgue, when Robert Florey basically takes the ideas that he was going to put into his adaptation of Frankenstein and carries them over into this adaptation of the Edgar Allan Poe story. And the film, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Bela Lugosi stars as a scientist named Dr. Miracle, who does not appear in the original Poe story, but he's basically doing experiments on evolution, on the connections between human beings and primates. And I think that no cinema scholar has ever said this, but I get the sense that the screenwriters, and there were 3 screenwriters who worked on Murders in the Rue Morgue, one of whom was a very young John Huston, before John Huston became one of the most famous directors, of course, directing The Maltese Falcon and Treasure of the Sierra Madre and etc., who was friends with George Hodel, who, according to Steve Hodel, was the Black Dahlia killer. But John Huston and the 2 other screenwriters who are working on Murders in the Rue Morgue, I have a feeling they took elements from H.P. Lovecraft's 1920s short story, The White Ape, which appeared in Weird Tales. And I think they combined certain elements from the Lovecraft story with the Poe story, which would happen later on when Roger Corman did The Haunted Palace. It's really an adaptation of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft, but it's advertised as being a Poe story, which maybe Lovecraft would have been felt complimented by that. I don't know. But in the film, Dr. Miracle is doing these experiments by kidnapping young women, young prostitutes off the street, bringing them back to his lair. He experiments on them, tortures them, kills them, and then dumps them in the river, where the local police assume that they're either drowning accidents or suicides. Which is interesting that sort of describes the whole smiley face killer scenario.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
So it's even more interesting that John Huston co-wrote it, since he was friends with George Hodel, who was later connected with the Black Dahlia. I don't know what that means, but I'm throwing it out there for the serial killer hounds in the audience. It's certainly intriguing. So in the movie, he's doing these experiments by mixing the blood of these prostitutes with these apes. And in the original script, he was actually supposed to be breeding the prostitutes with the apes, but that was going a little too far. So he says that he's mixing the blood of the two. And so all of that, none of that is in the original Poe story. But this was a way to examine the whole theme of Darwinian evolution in a way that audiences would find acceptable and not rejected outright. And there's a whole slew of these types of films. In that same year, Bela Lugosi's in another movie called The Island of Lost Souls, directed by Earl Kenton, which is an adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and stars Charles Laughton as well. And this too, that film was about the connections between primates and human beings. And so you can go on, and from the 30s and the 40s, there are all these films that come just one after the other, and then but they culminate eventually in 1960 when Inherit the Wind comes out, the Stanley Kramer film, which is all about the Scopes monkey trial. And so this is a pattern that I lay out in many different chapters in the book, and that is, you'll get the kind of metaphorical, hidden examination of these taboo themes, usually disguised as genre films, either horror or science fiction or mystery. I have another chapter that's just about Westerns. And Inherit the Wind comes out, which is just a straight drama about the Scopes monkey trial, where Darwin's theory was on trial. And so it stars Spencer Tracy and Frederick March. Now, Spencer Tracy and Frederick March both played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Frederick March played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Ruben Mamoulian version in 1932, and Spencer Tracy played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Victor Fleming version in the 1940s. And in both versions, Dr. Jekyll, when he drinks his potion, will revert to a kind of hairy, ape-like creature, which is not necessarily suggested in the original novella by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's more implied that he turns into a more human-looking character. So I think that was foremost in Kramer's mind when he cast Frederick March and Spencer Tracy in Inherit the Wind. I think he had that Dr. Jekyll primate kind of like Robert Sullivan calls it cult casting, that in the back of the audience's mind, they will connect these two actors with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde while watching this story, this straight drama about the Scopes monkey trial. So once the Inherit the Wind comes out in 1960, that kind of odd subgenre of Darwinian horror movie kind of just fades out. So because it's no longer a taboo topic anymore, now it's just been discussed nakedly out in the open as a realistic drama. And so the need to disguise the taboo under some sort of mystery or horror or science fiction trappings, there's no need to do that anymore because it's a less sensitive topic now. So you see that kind of subgenre just die out over time. Huh. And so I trace that kind of evolution among various different taboo topics. So like there's another chapter that's called The Brains That Killed Kennedy. And I think I would have been remiss if I didn't tackle the JFK assassination in the book. Because so I focus on a book called Were We Controlled by Lincoln Lawrence, which it's not the earliest JFK assassination book. I think Richard Popkins' The Second Oswald and Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment predate it by about a year or two. But it's certainly among the first of the important JFK assassination books. And it's the first to tie in CIA mind control programs with the assassination. Okay. And a lot of people would have first learned about Dr. Jose Delgado, MK Ultra scientist, from reading Were We Controlled? The book came out in 1967, which is a full 6 years before MK Ultra was declassified. So, I mean, this was definitely a sensitive, dangerous topic, the idea that the U.S. government is experimenting on its own citizens in the interest of national security was not something that was going to be advertised openly, in just a naked drama, Yeah. So instead, you have to encode it. So the book, Were We Controlled, was written under a pseudonym, and we're not entirely certain who Lincoln Lawrence was, but many people assume it was a guy named Art Ford, who was a journalist and a radio host. It was an extremely obscure book at the time, but I have a feeling that maybe a lot of certain key figures in Hollywood may have read the book, and that it might influence some of these later films. And I think at the time, if people read it, they probably would have thought that it was science fiction or a hoax or both. Mm-hmm. But in retrospect, even though it's written in a kind of awkward, naive style, it's really prescient in terms of its knowledge of government mind control programs that were top secret and classified at the time the book was written. And supposedly Dick Russell, who wrote one of the best JFK assassination books, The Man Who Knew Too Much in the early 90s, apparently Dick Russell spoke to Art Ford one time, and Ford said the main source for War We Controlled was an intelligence insider who passed information to Ford through an attorney named Martin Scheiman, who committed suicide around the same time that War We Controlled was published. That information comes from Adam Gorightly, who gave me a blurb for the book, by the way.
Nice.
It's possible that the book is a mixture of like genuine information and disinformation.
Sure.
There's information in the book about MK Ultra that later turned out to be accurate, based on declassified documents that came out in the early 1970s. So I'm inclined to believe that there's genuine information in the book as well.
And also, they destroyed so many of the MK Ultra documents that we only got a small sampling of what they did.
Absolutely. And sometimes, even recently, if you go to my website, cryptoschatology.com, and you search for like MK Ultra, you'll see that from time to time, new documents come out. Recently there was a biography written about Sidney Gottlieb, based on documents that have come out since the purging in the early 70s, where a lot of these documents were completely destroyed. Richard Helms, the head of the CIA at the time, said, we got to get rid of this stuff for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
We got to bury the bodies. So, if they felt the need to do that, then certainly we can say that this was definitely a taboo topic. And so, yet nonetheless, we see the topic discussed in the form of various science fiction films even before the JFK assassination, before War We Controlled by Lincoln Lawrence. So I go into a film, I start before 63 in 1955 with a movie called Creature with the Atom Brain, directed by Edward Kahn and written by Kurt Siodmak. Now, what was interesting is I would pick the film based on the subject matter, and the subject matter would stand out like signal to noise. And then later I would look into, well, who wrote it? Who directed it? Who are the people who were involved in creating this thing? And every single time I would look into who wrote it, the person who wrote it had some connection to insiders, military insiders or government insiders. So it's not like I looked at the creators first and said, let's see what they did. And I looked at the art first and thought, this seems significant. Let's find out who created it. And always it went back to someone with a connection to the military or the government in some way. So Creature with the Atom Brain deals with Jose Delgado, even though hardly anyone would have known who the hell Jose Delgado was in 1955. They actually refer to him explicitly. They don't say him by name, but they refer to a scientist from Spain who was doing experiments with implants, cracking open animal skulls of monkeys, and putting in implants, and then being able to control them from afar. And Creature with the Atom Brain was written by Kurt Siodmak. Kurt Siodmak was a science fiction writer who most famously wrote Donovan's Brain in the 1940s. And in his memoir, Wolfman's Maker, which came out in 2000, the same year he died, Kurt Siodmak claimed that he had worked for the OSS during the 1940s. And the story that he tells is that when Donovan's Brain came out, he gets contacted by the OSS, and the guy who contacts him says, I read this book, Donovan's Brain, which is all about a scientist who figures out how to control people, how they remotely use people as assassins to kill from afar, action at a distance. That's the wet dream of any militarist, action at a distance. So that's what the book is about. It's about how to kill people from afar, using other human beings as remote control assassins. And so this guy at the OSS says to Kurt Siodmak, oh, we saw your book, Donovan's Brain. We thought it was a parody of W.H. Donovan, the head of the OSS. That's why we read it. And then we read it, and they offer him a job. He never says what he says. Yeah, I accepted the job, and I worked for them for X number of years. He never says what he did for them. Right? So I assume that the only reason you would approach a science fiction writer is if you wanted him to write science fiction for you.
Right.
Now it could be that, and I wrote a book called Spies and Saucers, which is fiction with 3 novellas that all take place in the 1950s. And one of the stories, the main title story, is Spies and Saucers. I have a character named Kurt Adamson who's based on Kurt Siodmak with a little bit of Phil Dick thrown in there. And this guy is a victim of the blacklist, of the communist blacklist. So he doesn't have a job anymore. So he's approached by this government agency, and they say, hey, we've seen the films that you've written, and we think you'd be the perfect guy to write the screenplay. And so he starts working on the screenplay. And then later, as the first UFO contactee stories start popping up in the newspaper, he starts seeing names and key words that he made up. He's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And he begins to realize that they hired him to create scenarios that they were going to enact in real life without telling him that.
Okay.
And that was a novella that I wrote. It's one of those things where I think that this is how it happened, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to write it as fiction. But so Kurt Siodmak writes Creature with the Atom Brain. I don't think that this was a film that he was told to write. I suspect it was something he wrote because he knew this information, and he thought, how do I get this information out in a way that's not going to get me arrested for violating security oaths or whatever.
Yeah.
So he creates a metaphor. The movie is about an ex-Nazi scientist and this mafia guy who team up, and they're resurrecting dead people, and they crack open the skull. They put in the Jose Delgado implants in there, and they even have subjective shots where the scientist, you're looking through the dead man's eyes as he's going out and killing police officers and judges and all these people who put the mafia guy in jail. Yeah. So, except, if you remove the zombie aspect from it, it's pretty much historically accurate in terms of the MK Ultra technology, or at least what they were attempting to do. Yeah. And so, and it's interesting. There's a scene in Creature with the Atom Brain that sets the template for a lot of the other movies that I examine in this particular chapter, which is an examination of the JFK assassination, is seen entirely through film. There will be a part in each of these movies, right in the middle of the movie, where the movie suddenly stops and a character will say, "Let's watch a film," and then you'll get a little movie within the movie that tells you that valuable information. And so in Creature with the Atom Brain, the main detective character who's trying to figure out what the hell's going on, he meets with the scientist, and the scientist says, "Oh, are you familiar with this new technology? Let me roll a film for you." And he pulls out a film and he shows it, and you see he shows you like these mice and monkeys that have been experimented on and that can be controlled remotely. And then the detective says, "Are you suggesting that this could happen to human beings?" And the scientist says, "Well, the experiments haven't, as far as I know, the experiments haven't gotten to that level yet." But it's clear that Siodmak puts that there at a time when Delgado only had a few articles published in obscure scientific journals about these experiments. Siodmak slips that in there to show it to the audience, say, "Yeah, this is actually happening." And oddly enough, years later, Rocky Erickson of the 13th Floor Elevators, he wrote one of my favorite albums is The Evil One, which is Rocky Erickson's album from 1980. And on that album is a song called Creature with the Atom Brain. Mm. And Rocky Erickson was committed to a Houston mental asylum in the late 60s for having a schizophrenic breakdown. And what's interesting is that at that same time, Marshall Applewhite, who will later form Heaven's Gate, was also in a Houston mental hospital, and of course eventually runs off with one of the nurses there, Bonnie Nettles, and they form the Heaven's Gate UFO cult. Mm-hmm. And Erickson spends time in a Houston mental hospital and comes out completely obsessed with UFOs and aliens, and writes a whole slew of songs with UFO imagery. And the song he wrote, Creature with the Atom Brain, I almost feel like he connected with the movie in some way. I wonder, like, what was going on at these mental hospitals in Houston? Right, yeah. Because I always thought, I always suspected that Bonnie Nettles, the nurse, was kind of like Marshall Applewhite's handler. Mm. And it's interesting that he meets her in the psychiatric ward, and then they decide to run off together and create this UFO cult. And then Bonnie Nettles dies leaving Marshall Applewhite kind of adrift. And of course, eventually it all culminates in the mass suicide in San Diego, which is where Camilio took place, in San Diego in the 1995, maybe, or no, 97, I think.
Was it 97?
I think it's March of 1997, I believe. I could be wrong. I think that's right, which is interesting because I didn't learn until years later that when Damien was in San Diego, when all the Camilio stuff was going on, that Jose Delgado was living in San Diego at the same time. I didn't know that until years later when I saw Delgado's obituary, where he died. He was living in the same area as Damien at the same exact time. But it's interesting. I think Rocky Erickson may have seen Creature with the Atom Brain and really connected with it on some subliminal level, which is why he's inspired to write the song, Creature with the Atom Brain. But then a year after Creature with the Atom Brain, the next film I tackle is a very obscure science fiction B film called The Gamma People, which I only know about. It was never released on DVD or Blu-ray, as far as I know.
What was the name of it?
The Gamma People.
Yeah, I don't know that one. Heaven's Gate was March 26, 1977.
Well, the suicide wasn't in 1977. The suicide.
I'm sorry, 1997.
Yeah, 1997. Okay, yeah. So I was correct about that. See, I remember it happened right around my birthday.
Ah, okay.
And I was like, happy birthday to me. The Gamma People. The only reason I know about it is because at one point in high school, Damien I write about in Camilio, right. He was living in my apartment. His parents had kicked him out, which I don't even think is legal. Like, he lived in my apartment for a year. I think if you're 16, your parents are obligated to take care of you.
Yeah, pretty much.
But Damien's dad was a narcotics cop, so I guess he could get away with that. So Damien's living at my apartment, with my parents. For about a year, and at one point he was working at Sam Goody's in the Del Amo Mall in Torrance, and he comes home one day with a VHS tape, The Gamma People, and I think he just grabbed it because it looked weird, and he goes, "We should watch this." So we watched it, and it's this really weird movie about these two American journalists who end up stranded in this tiny Balkan village in the middle of nowhere. It almost it's like a precursor to The Prisoner. In a way, like the little Balkan village they're in is kind of similar in look to the village that number 6 Patrick McGowan is trapped in.
Yeah,
it's all about, the movie is all about. It was also, by the way, it was the B film on a double feature with 1984. So if you went to the theaters, you would see 1984 and then The Gamma People. It's all about using radiation and mind control techniques on children to create these savants who will later grow up and be the technocrats who will rule the world. It may sound familiar. I could name some technocrats right now who might fit that bill. But if you read the testimony that was delivered to the Commission on Radiation Experiments on Children that occurred during the Bill Clinton administration, you will find that the Gamma People, it's not too far off from reality. There were experiments being done on children with radiation. Wow. And track down John Rappaport's book, U.S. Government Mind Control Experiments on Children. You'll see the testimony printed in that book, but you can even go to YouTube and find Bill Clinton's public apology to the victims of these experiments. It's like one of those things that just fell down the memory hole. No one remembers it. But what they found was when these people were investigating these experiments that were being done on children back in the 50s and 60s, in regards to radiation, that these same scientists were also doing mind control experiments. And that's exactly what's going on in The Gamma People. And so what's interesting is when you look into who wrote it, the person who wrote the first draft was Robert Aldrich. Robert Aldrich later becomes the director who does Kiss Me Deadly and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and a whole slew of other classic films. But Robert Aldrich is not credited on the film, but we know from studio paperwork that Robert Aldrich wrote the first draft of The Gamma People. And Robert Aldrich was the first cousin of Nelson Rockefeller. So when you find that out, you think, okay, in the 1950s, at that same time that Aldrich was working on The Gamma People, Nelson Rockefeller held the post of Special Assistant to the President for Psychological Warfare. So what's going on there? Was Robert Aldrich at a cocktail party? Nelson Rockefeller said something he wasn't supposed to say.
Right.
Did Robert Aldrich have access to information that other people did not have at the time? And he thought, I'm going to slip it into this screenplay. And what's interesting is that it was produced by Albert Broccoli, who later went on to produce the James Bond movies. And Gary Rhodes, he's friends with Tom Weaver, and Tom Weaver is one of the main experts on the Universal horror films of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And Tom Weaver said that he knew someone who had tried to interview Albert Broccoli, and this guy said that whenever you brought up the Gamma people to Albert Broccoli, he would get extremely angry and not want to talk about it. He would just shut down. Huh. Now, I don't know if that's because he was embarrassed by it, or if there was something about the film that he thought was too sensitive and he didn't want to discuss it. Whatever the reason is, he would become very irate if you brought up the topic of the Gamma people, and he would simply refuse to discuss it. And then from there, then I go on to the Manchurian Candidate.
Well, hang on. So the Gamma people is available online. It is. Oh, good. If nothing else, it's in archive.org, so you can watch it for free.
Excellent. I think you'll find it's a very peculiar film. It's a very nightmarish film, and even though it is clearly a B film. And the meaning of the term B film has kind of become distorted over the years. People will use the word B film as if that means it's a bad movie.
Right.
When B film simply meant that, they would at that time always release two films. There was the A film, which had, more production values, bigger stars, etc. And then there was the second film, the B film, that was meant to follow it. So B film doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means it didn't have the production values of the A feature.
Yeah, I always thought it just meant it was a lower budget.
Essentially, it was a lower budget, and yet, ironically, there's a lot of A films that have kind of disappeared into obscurity, and yet some of these B films are still. Yeah. People are still talking about them. Like Ed Wood. And so the Manchurian Candidate, which was definitely an A film, not a B film. Yeah. The Manchurian Candidate, which is probably one of my favorite films of the 1960s, based on the novel by Richard Condon. Richard Condon was not an insider like Kurt Siodmak. He wasn't related to an insider like Robert Aldrich. But Richard Condon, he had worked as a Hollywood press agent before he started writing novels. And so as a result of that, he met people like Cecil B. DeMille and Howard Hughes, who he called classical monsters. And I think the phrase he used to describe them was men who combine vast minds and dubious morals. And he said, and among them, he met Joseph Kennedy and the Kennedys. And he said these experiences, like meeting these people, like turned him into an anti-authoritarian. And he thought he was satirizing people like that when he wrote The Manchurian Candidate, and later Winter Kills, which is a less famous book than The Manchurian Candidate, but is very significant. But it turns out his satire hit a little too close to home because the FBI actually launched an investigation into him based on the Manchurian Candidate. And they tried to suppress The Manchurian Candidate, and the government actually succeeded in suppressing the film adaptation of Winter Kills in the later 70s, but I might get into that later. But Richard Condon later writes the introduction to Walter Bowart's Operation Mind Control, and I was friends with Walter Bowart, and Operation Mind Control was like the first really major book about MKUltra after the program was declassified in the early 70s. And in that introduction, Richard Condon said, he was basing his information in The Manchurian Candidate on articles, scientific articles, but really more, it was meant as satire. And he said, reading Bowart's book, he was shocked to learn like how close he was getting to the truth. And so Manchurian Candidate is the last film I deal with pre-JFK assassination. And then I start going into the films that come out after the JFK assassination, where you see that this sensitive topic is being dealt with in a metaphorical way, because nobody's going to write a film, in the 70s, just coming out and saying, oh, yes, we think that, there was more than one assassin, more than, just Lee Harvey Oswald. Right. So you get films like The Parallax View, which is probably one of my favorite films from the 70s, starring Warren Beatty. And the Parallax View, it's all about this. The Warren Beatty is a journalist, and he witnesses a presidential candidate get assassinated on top of the Space Needle in Seattle on the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, about a year later, his ex-girlfriend, who's also a journalist, comes to him and says, I think I have information that it was more than just some lone assassin. There was a conspiracy to kill this politician. And Warren Beatty kind of thinks she's crazy, and she goes off, and then she gets killed. And so immediately Warren Beatty is overwhelmed with guilt, and he realizes that she actually was onto something. So he picks up the investigation, and he discovers this corporation, Parallax, which I always wondered was maybe based on Permidex, the Swiss corporation that was allegedly involved in the JFK assassination, according to William Torbett's nomenclature of an assassination cabal, which I've always loved that title, Nomenclature of an Assassination Cabal. It sounds like one of those fictional books that you might find in H.P. Lovecraft or something.
Right,
like that. And also that accusation is repeated in Jim Garrison's On the Trail of the Assassins. But the name Permindex, it sounds very close to Parallax. And of course, CIA man Clay Shaw was tied to Permindex, which was tied to various anti-communist right-wing groups. But in the film and in the original novel, the journalist figures out that there's this corporation, Parallax, which is planting ads, classified ads, drawing in sociopaths, and they give you these applications. And so if they figure out you're the right kind of sociopath, they will hire you and basically begin to program you to be the perfect assassin. And Warren Beatty figures this out, and so he begins to infiltrate the corporation. He decides to apply for the position, and he is accepted. And there's, just as I've mentioned before, there are these scenes in these movies where halfway in the middle of the movie, it will show a movie within the movie. And the movie within the movie will give you all this information about mind control or assassinations or parapolitics in some way. And in the Parallax View, it's one of the most remarkable moments in the film. Warren Beatty is put in this room, and they say, watch this film. And so they begin to bombard him with all of these images. And it's quite remarkable the way it's this montage sequence is put together. And you see the juxtaposition of innocent images of a young, man and his girlfriend in a park. Then you might see, a happy, a nice sunny day. And then suddenly, there's a guy hanging from a tree. And then suddenly you see very violent images, and then you see 4-color images from Jack Kirby comic books, from the Thor comic book. And then suddenly you see images of warfare. And then again, back then to like a child eating an ice cream cone.
Right.
And it's what's remarkable about it is that you actually feel as if you're sitting in the chair there with Warren Beatty getting brainwashed during the middle of this montage. But when I saw the film, I thought, okay, I got to look into where did this idea come from? Who wrote this? So you look and you see it's based on a novel, The Parallax View by Lawrence Singer. Who's Lawrence Singer? You look into his background. He was a member of the OSS, just like Kurt Siodmak. And so you realize, okay, this isn't just coming out of his brain. This isn't just something he's dreaming up. It's based on information that he is obviously very well aware of. And then I go into Winter Kills, which is another Richard Condon novel. And Winter Kills is all about, it's fascinating. You could do a movie about the making of Winter Kills, even though it's a very obscure film. But there's all this drama that happened behind the scenes. The producer, Leonard Goldberg, he was handcuffed to his bed in his Manhattan apartment, shot through the head. The producer, Robert Sterling, was sentenced to 40 years on a marijuana conviction. And according to the director of the film, William Rickard, Sterling believes to this day that one of the reasons for his imprisonment was his role in making Winter Kills. And he told William Rickard that his ambition was to follow Winter Kills with other conspiracy themed films, but obviously none of those were ever made. But basically, Winter Kills is about Richard Condon. Again, intended this to be a satirical notion that Joseph Kennedy basically ordered a hit on JFK because Joseph Kennedy had pulled all these strings to get JFK into the Oval Office, and then once there, JFK starts making his own decisions and kind of going rogue.
Right.
And this is upsetting Joseph Kennedy's agenda, and so he's forced to hire somebody to take out the president, i.e., his son. And the president is the father who is responsible, supposedly, for the assassination is played by John Huston. So John Huston comes back into the story. But it's a fascinating film. It's really obscure, and it was removed from theaters after only a week, because apparently, according to the director, Ted Kennedy was running for president at the time, and they did not want this film out. And so some of the corporations that were tied to the Kennedys came out to suppress the film. And Richard Condon even wrote an article for, I think, the Atlantic Monthly called "Who Killed Winter Kills," and it went into the Machiavellian background story of making this film. And then from there, I go into the 1980s. I cover They Live, John Carpenter's They Live.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films in the 1980s, which I saw on opening night. I was already a John Carpenter fan at that point. I'd seen Prince of Darkness at the theater the year before.
Oh, I love that one.
I remember on opening night, I was there with my girlfriend from high school, and we were sitting there waiting for the next showing. And then the previous showing ends, and this couple comes out who I didn't know, but my girlfriend knew them from high school. And we go, so how was it? And this guy goes, I don't know. It's not good. It's not. There's this long fight scene that goes on and on. And I already knew he was wrong. I already just predicted that his assessment was probably incorrect. And we're watching it. When it gets to the fight scene in the alley, fighting over the sunglasses, halfway through it, I remember turning to my girlfriend. I said, "This is amazing. This is incredible." It was the first fight scene I'd ever seen that was a metaphor for something else. It wasn't just a fight scene. It was a metaphor for that. You're talking to somebody. It's like, God damn it, just listen to what I'm saying. Isn't it obvious? Put on the sunglasses, right? And also, and then the film They Live was #1 at the box office for 1 week, and then it disappeared. And I didn't hear anyone talk about it for years afterwards. Occasionally, my mind would drift back to the film, but I didn't hear anyone say anything about it until maybe round about like the early 2000s, like post 9/11. I suddenly started hearing people talking about They Live. And then like the DVD came out, and then there was a Blu-ray with a commentary by John Carpenter and Roddy Piper.
Right.
And then around 2000, and then Jonathan Lethem, novelist Jonathan Lethem, who wrote Gun with Occasional Music and Girl in Landscape and many other science fiction novels. Jonathan Lethem wrote a whole book-length study of just They Live. And then another writer, some academic, wrote just a book-length study of They Live. And I remember it was in 2004, and I became a Freemason in 2003. 2004, I became a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. So I think it was at some point in 2004, I get a phone call from one of the fellow brothers at the lodge. And the guy calls me and says, hey, you should come down to the lodge in Torrance next Monday because we have a celebrity coming. We have an actor coming to be initiated. I said, oh, really? Who is it? He goes, it's a guy named Roddy Piper. And I go, wait, what? I go, Roddy Piper is going to be initiated in our lodge? And he said, yeah. And I go, that's amazing. He's in one of my favorite films, They Live. And the guy was like, what's They Live? He'd never heard of it. And unfortunately, and I will regret this forever, at that time, it just so happened that I'd been sick and I'd missed like 4 successive days of classes. So I would have had to have like canceled a 5th class to go to the initiation. Oh. So I didn't want to do that. So I didn't go. I should have just canceled it and gone for that night. But he was
That's
indeed.
crazy.
I learned later he was indeed initiated, and apparently he said it was something he wanted to do before he died. So I don't know if he knew he was, of course, because later he died of cancer. So I don't know if maybe he already knew. And then that made me think back to in They Live, right after he finds the sunglasses for the first time, he puts them on, and then you get that extraordinary sequence.
Right.
And it's like it's the inverse of Victor Fleming's Wizard of Oz. In Wizard of Oz, the fantasy sequence is in color and reality is in black and white. And They Live, it's reversed.
Yeah.
The fantasy world is in color. When he puts the sunglasses on and sees naked reality, it's black and white. And he puts the glasses on. He starts seeing the slogans. He begins walking down the street. He immediately passes a sign in the back. You can see it says the Los Angeles Athletic Club. What's interesting about that is around that same time, so like 2003, 2004, I was interested in finding out more about the Royal Order of the Jesters, which some people, I mean, everyone's heard, well, most people have heard of the Freemasons at least, but probably fewer people have heard of the Royal Order of the Jesters.
Yeah, I haven't.
I assume you would have heard about it.
No, I haven't heard about them.
What was that?
I haven't heard of them.
Oh, you have not? Oh, okay. When you reach the 32nd degree in either the York Rite or the Scottish Rite, at that point you can join the Shriners if you wish, or you can apply to join the Shriners. Then if you go through the Shriners at a certain point, at a certain level, you can then petition to join the Royal Order of the Jesters. And so I was curious about, I was at the Blue Lodge, the same lodge where Roddy Piper was later initiated. And I was sitting there and I was wondering which of these guys is a jester. And there was one particular guy who was kind of really loud. You kind of have to read between the lines. He was kind of loud and brash, big, colorful presence in the room. You couldn't ignore him. And I thought, I bet that guy's a jester. So I positioned myself at the same table as him. And then there was another guy. In fact, it was the same guy who later called me to tell me to come down to the lodge to see Roddy Piper. He was sitting at the same table. So I sit in between them. And I turned to the other guy, not the guy I think might be a jester. I turned to the other guy and I say to him, hey, I was really curious. What's up with the Royal Order of the Jesters? And this guy immediately goes, oh, I'm not a jester. I don't really know much about it. But you know who would? That guy there. And he points to the guy sitting to the right of me. And I go, I nailed it. I knew it. And so this guy just immediately starts talking about the jesters without me having to ask anything.
Nice.
And immediately he goes, the other guy asks him, what do the jesters do? And then the other guy goes, we have fun. And then he goes, where do they meet? And he goes, we meet once a month at the Los Angeles Athletic Club. Oh, wow. And he goes, just the other day, the chief of police, the LAPD, gave a big lecture there. And I was like, well, that's interesting. The chief of the LAPD is a jester, apparently. Right? Yeah. And so then later, I'm watching They Live, and I see him come around the corner. He's just put the sunglasses on. He sees all the slogans, and immediately passes by the Los Angeles Athletic Club. And I go, okay, this is, it could be a coincidence. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure, but I think that's a fascinating little detail there.
Yeah. So we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. Contact info and a recommendation. So contact info is wheredidtheroadgo.com. That's really all you need. If you go there, you'll find all the social media links. You'll find a link tree to all the stuff I do, including my music show, The Last Exit for the Lost. You'll find just everything, shows going all the way back. Now, all the shows are not in the RSS feed, and I am fixing that slowly. So every week now you're getting a new show and then a 2014 show in the feed. And eventually we'll hopefully catch up. But this way, this stuff gets put back into the feed, and after a few days, I put it back in the actual date it came out, if that makes sense. So, yeah. And if you want to become a patron, you can do that at wheredidtheroadgo.com as well. Just click on the big Patreon link. It's $3 a month, and you get extra content with almost every show, plus shows commercial free, and a couple weeks early. So, as far as a recommendation, I'm going to go with a movie called Rabbit Trap. All I'll say about this is if you like the type of really weird stuff we talk about on this show, especially with the Fae and fairy faith and stuff like that, Rabbit Trip is definitely a trip. I didn't love it, but I really appreciated what they did with it. So that's going to be my recommendation for this week. And now back to the show. And I am here with Robert Guffey as we're discussing, what is the name of the book again?
Hollywood Haunts the World.
And you were talking about They Live and Roddy Piper, and I mean, being a wrestling fan, They Live was never out of my radar.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Have you ever seen Death Comes to Frogtown?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's an excellent double feature, I think.
And credit where it's due. If it wasn't for Roddy Piper, there never would have been a Hulk Hogan.
Well, there's an interesting genre of horror writers who are super into pro wrestling.
Oh yeah,
in the WWF. In fact, there was once a pro wrestling magazine. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember a lot of horror writers worked for it. Dennis Etchison, who worked with John Carpenter, wrote the novelizations to Halloween. And in fact, Dennis Etchison wrote a version of Halloween 4 that was never made. Oh. That's fascinating. We could talk about that. But Dennis Etchison, Scott Edelman, various other people who were like into splatterpunk horror fiction wrote for wrestling magazines as well.
Huh, not surprising.
I guess there is some sort of natural. There's as a kid, I watched the Samson movies, which were English language translations of the Santos Mexican films, which Santos was the Mexican wrestler who had the silver mask and the Liberace cape. And he would fight various supernatural beings in every movie. So there's like Samson versus the vampire women, Samson versus the Aztec mummy, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's like 100 Samson movies. And in fact, I was at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery on Dia de los Muertos back in 2005 or 2006 with my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. We're walking around, and what they do is at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery is you can go and build your own diorama to a departed loved one. And I just happened to come across this incredibly complex diorama in honor of Santos, the Mexican wrestler.
Nice.
And there was a little plaque, and the plaque would say who made it. And the plaque said it was made by David Scow and Krista Faust, who are both horror writers. And so I thought, well, that's fascinating. These two horror writers made this Dia de los Muertos diorama in honor of Santos. So I thought there's another horror wrestling connection there. Roddy Piper is not required to give an Academy Award-winning performance in They Live. No. However, he does a really good job, particularly in that scene with David Keith. Is that the other?
I can't
Keith
remember.
David is the other actor in that scene, and he has the speech, the monologue that he gives about his childhood with his dad, and he gives the speech about, I still believe in the dream. I still believe in the American dream, and he talks about his dad and being abused by his dad. And I read an interview with Carpenter saying that I think he incorporated elements from Roddy Piper's life into that little speech.
Not surprising.
And he gives it's a really nice moment. It's a nice performance, of this human moment from this character who's really a cipher. His name is nothing in the film. That's his actual name. It's just Nada. So he's required to be really just a cipher at Everyman. It really is almost like an updating of the Everyman plays, the Miracle plays. But in that moment, he is required to act. And I think with the right director, he actually could have evolved into a really good dramatic actor, if given the right material.
Oh yeah. I thought Piper was always a decent actor. Wrestling's acting. That's part of it.
Of course.
You know, Piper was a great heel, which is what made Hogan so popular, because he was such a great heel.
Well, and of course, we can tie this into the Trump administration, because Hulk Hogan spoke at the Republican convention last year, right? Yeah. And Linda McMahon is in the Trump administration, and I have to say, my conspiratorial brain, of course, when the supposed assassination attempt occurred, my brain naturally went to the thought is this kayfabe? Right. Is Trump just taking a dive? And then he reached, I remember Trump yelling out right after the shot whizzed past his ear. He yelled out, "My shoes, where are my shoes?" Like he didn't have his shoes on. I thought, is that where the razor blade was? Is that where he did the cut on the ear? No, I don't. I have no idea if that happened or not. But I have to say that, since my brain did immediately go there, that's really Trump's fault in the first place. I mean, it's not hard to imagine.
He is in the WWE Hall of Fame.
It's since he's such a showman anyway, it's not really hard to imagine him doing something like that.
No, I don't think it's hard to imagine any politician doing something like that.
That's probably true. I don't know that even Trump would risk a bullet going past his face, but I guess I can't entirely dismiss the idea. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
But
there's questionable stuff. Let's leave it there.
Yes, let's say that. After they live, we then go in that chapter. We culminate with Oliver Stone's JFK, and just like the previous pattern I described with the Darwinian horror films, you get to inherit the wind. They just discuss the topic openly now as a straight drama. Well, you get to JFK. Early 90s, Oliver Stone. Now you just get a straight story. It's not hidden by metaphor. There's no gamma people. There's no creatures with atom brains. There's no Parallax Corporation. It's just Kevin Costner as Jim Garrison, and he's telling you the story of how this might have happened. And again, as in the other films I mentioned, where in the middle of the film you get a film within the film. In JFK, you stop during the trial, and then Kevin Costner says, "Let's look at the Zapruder film," and so you get the film within the film, giving you information about the conspiracy. And then at the end, to extend this metaphor even further, at the end of the summation speech that Kevin Costner gives as Jim Garrison, there's one point near the end where Kevin Costner looks directly into the camera, breaks the fourth wall, looks directly into the camera and says, "The decision's up to you," meaning to the jury, but also to the people sitting in the audience. He looks directly into the camera and delivers that line. So it's almost like all edifice, all artifice, all metaphor and symbolism has been abandoned, and now we're just dealing with it as a naked truth. And in 2025, I think most people, you ask them, even if they only know a vague amount of information about the JFK assassination, will probably say they didn't think that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Right.
And so it's not really a taboo topic anymore. So you don't have to cloak it. And all the people who may have been imprisoned as a result of being involved in this conspiracy are no longer in a position to be punished. So it's not really a taboo topic anymore. Yeah. You don't have to disguise it, though I do extend the chapter even further to discussing the Jonathan Demme remake of Manchurian Candidate, which gives more just naked information about Jose Delgado. And there's a movie that I should have included, but it didn't occur to me until the tail end of this whole process, and that is Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor, which came out in 2020. Have you seen that?
Yes.
So I told Damien he should watch it because the film is all about basically mass shooters who are remote controlled by somebody else to commit these crimes, and the assassin that the film is about is the possessor, and the possessee are these various people, victims, targeted individuals who have been taken over, and they are used as vehicles to commit these mass murders. And then afterwards, after the murders occurred, they're sitting around thinking, what the hell just happened? Because from their perspective, it was just a big blackout. And then suddenly, they're surrounded, like 36 dead bodies are surrounding them, and they're like, what happened? And in Possessor, the same motif. In the middle of the film, you get a film. They show you a film where they actually include footage from Jose Delgado's actual experiments on monkeys in the middle of the movie. I mean, it's actually from his exact experiments, from his films. I should have included Possessor as the concluding film of that chapter, but it did not occur to me until the tail end of the process. I was able to slip it in the last chapter. I have a list of a long list of films that I consider to be films that deal with the cult of taboos. And one of those that I list is Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor. Okay. But that this whole pattern of examining the way the taboo is dealt with in metaphor, and then show how that evolves with the course of many decades. I follow that through in many different chapters and many different genres.
So what is the haunted carriage taboo?
Well, in the Phantom Carriage.
Oh, Phantom Carriage. Okay.
The Phantom Carriage. That's the last chapter, because as I said, I go backwards to 1921. And the film Phantom Carriage is based on a novel by Selma Lagerlof. And she, as I'm watching the film, I'm thinking, okay, ostensibly you might think this is a Christian metaphor, a parable. Mm-hmm. And the film is about, it opens on New Year's Eve, and there are these drunkards who are in this graveyard, and it's almost midnight, and they get into an argument, and one guy grabs his bottle of alcohol, hits the other guy over the head, and kills him. So what happens is, if you murder someone at midnight on New Year's Eve, Death's driver appears, and Death's driver relinquishes the reins of the Phantom Carriage to you, and you now have to take over the position as Death's driver for the next year until midnight of the following year, when hopefully someone else murders somebody at midnight and can take over your position. And it's really a revolutionary film in terms of special effects, because we're talking 1921. It must have been extremely difficult to do what they do in this movie. There's this whole extraordinary sequence where you see Death's driver. It's almost like a montage. It's like the incredible montage in Parallax View. You see a montage of the Phantom Carriage visiting various areas of the world. One guy shot himself in his den, and the Phantom Carriage comes through the wall, and Death's driver picks up the body and puts it on the carriage and rolls off back through the wall again. There's a scene where there's a suicide. This person has drowned themselves, and they're at the bottom of the ocean, and the Phantom Carriage goes down. You see it go down under the water into the ocean, and the Phantom Carriage is walking along the bottom of the ocean, and Death's driver picks up the corpse, puts it in the carriage. And so this was all very sophisticated, time-consuming, in-camera effects. And it's the first film where they shot night for night, because at the time, lighting was very difficult. So usually they would have to shoot everything. You've heard the term, day for night. They would have to shoot nighttime scenes in the daytime. Otherwise, you just could not see it. Later on, Kubrick and some of his films did actually shot by candlelight. Well, that took many decades to be able to do something like that. But in 1921, they were actually shooting these graveyard scenes at night in an actual graveyard, and so this was very difficult to do, but they figured out how to do it. So as I'm watching the film, it's a metaphysical film about the afterlife, and I'm thinking, well, I guess you could interpret this as almost like a variation on A Christmas Carol in a way, a much darker version of A Christmas Carol. But then I began to notice like certain Masonic symbolism pops up in the film. And then so I went back and got the original novel, which is actually quite short. And I start reading it and started looking into Selma Lagerlof, and I realized she was a Theosophist. So she was a follower of Blavatsky, and she was very much tied in. A lot of artists and writers were, in the early 1900s. Yeah. Edgar Rice Burroughs was into Theosophy. L. Frank Baum. There's a lot of theosophical symbolism in The Wizard of Oz and the other Oz books. In fact, L. Frank Baum, since there's a new Oz movie coming out, Wicked, L. Frank Baum lived in Chicago, and no one wanted to publish The Wizard of Oz. He self-published it. All the publishers thought it was terrible because it deviated from the German fairy tales that kids had grown up on, the Grimm's fairy tales. And L. Frank Baum thought that those stories were far too punitive, that they were more, about punishment. This is what happens if you try to think for yourself. You'll get thrown into an oven or something like that. And so Baum wanted to write an American fairy tale, he described it as. So Wizard of Oz is filled with theosophical symbolism, and Baum was a theosophist, and he used to vacation. He'd leave Chicago during the winter and come to San Diego in the summer. And in San Diego at that time was a theosophical commune. And in fact, he based Oz on the Hotel Coronado. The way that the Emerald City is described, that was inspired by the Hotel Coronado in San Diego. And after The Wizard of Oz became a huge success and became a musical on Broadway, he moved to California and, in fact, started producing his own Oz films. I had the privilege of seeing one of these just this past August at the same theater where my friend Gary Rhodes was married over here in El Segundo. It's the Old Town Music Hall. And they show silent films. They have an actual organ there, a Wurlitzer, and nice. The organist comes out and plays while the film is shown. So they showed one of L. Frank Baum's movies that he wrote and directed and produced based on his Oz novels. And it's really fascinating to see how, because this is the way Baum visualized it. This is how he saw the Cowardly Lion should look. This is how he saw how the Scarecrow should look, how Dorothy should look. So it's really fascinating, and you even get kind of certain theosophical elements that are absent. In other words, these screen versions of the Oz books are kind of new stories set in Oz, written by L. Frank Baum, where he takes kind of certain elements from the novels that have already been published and then mixes them with new elements, new ideas. And so L. Frank Baum, when he built his house, which he called Ozcott, in LA, he would often frequently drive up north to Summerlin, which is a town just outside Santa Barbara. And in fact, my wife grew up in Carpinteria, which is just outside Santa Barbara. And when she grew up there, Summerlin had the reputation of being a spooky town. Spooky things happened there. It was rumored to have been buried on top of a Native American burial ground, for example. Well, back in the early 1900s, L. Frank Baum would drive up to Summerlin because there was a theosophical commune up there as well. They would do seances and all kinds of interesting things. And Summerlin is the name, according to Theosophy, where it's a kind of land where children go when they die. If children die prematurely at a young age, they go to this place called Summerlin. And so some people believe that Oz, because L. Frank Baum was friends with this girl who died at a young age. And some people think that Dorothy is the kind of metaphorical representation and Oz is Summerlin. It's based on this girl who died and she went to Oz. So there's all kinds of interesting theosophical symbolism in Oz, in the planet Mars and Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars novels. Mars is described very much like Atlantis is described by Blavatsky. And Arthur Conan Doyle, when he wasn't writing Sherlock Holmes stories about the uber rationalist Sherlock Holmes, he was writing, books about the supernatural. He believed in the Cottingham fairies. Yeah. And in fact, there's a great book, a novel that came out in the 90s called Photographing Fairies, in which Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is a character, and it's all about the Cottingham fairies. Yeah. A very interesting book. And Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Maricot Deep, which is a novel about these scientists who go into a bathyscape, which unsnaps and falls down to the bottom of the ocean. And these scientists are trapped in this bathyscape at the bottom of the Pacific or the Atlantic. And they only have a certain amount of air. They don't know what they're going to do. And then they see these human beings outside the bathyscape who drag the bathyscape to this city, which is Atlantis. And then they meet the Queen of Atlantis, who gives these long diatribes that are like thinly disguised theosophical speeches. So there was a lot. There were Gene Toomer, who was part of the Harlem Renaissance. He wrote a novel called Cain, which is kind of an obscure novel, but worth looking into. Gene Toomer was a theosophist. So you really see it spread throughout various like cutting edge artists and writers at that time. And so perhaps it's not a surprise that Selma Lagerlof was also a theosophist. But when you realize that and you see the film, and the director really worked hard with her to get the adaptation correct. Like he wanted her approval before they even started shooting this thing. And so director and writer worked very closely together to adapt this novel. And you begin to see that this is a theosophical parable. And of course, Theosophy was a very controversial, alternative religion in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So you had to disguise that. So he kind of cleverly disguises it as something that you could say is a Christian parable, but clearly is not. And so that's the taboo that's being addressed in that film is Theosophy. And I also there's a fun chapter. I had a lot of fun writing this chapter called "One Chance Out Between Two Worlds," and it's all about It Came from Outer Space, Twin Peaks, and Jack Parsons.
Oh.
It's fascinating that, in fact, I just recently took a walking tour. I took a Jack Parsons walking tour. I went over to Pasadena with a friend of mine, and we took the trail that leads to the Devil's Gate Dam, where Hubbard and Parsons did their early sex magic rituals. And JPL is just right off on the horizon. I mean, you can see the building, over the area where they were doing these things. And then we drove over to the location of, 1003 South Orange Grove, where the Parsons mansion was on Millionaires Row in Pasadena. And then we drove over to the place where he blew himself up, which is a different location, a little bit further down on South Orange Grove. And here, this is interesting. I took photographs, of the location. There's the mansion is not there anymore. It's been razed, and there's like an apartment building there now where the parsonage once was. And right across the street, we take some photographs, and my friend and I, we're getting in the car. We make a U-turn to drive away to go back from the side street onto South Orange Grove. And I said to Jim, I go, look, and in the house right across the street from the parsonage, there's this big old house. It's probably been there since the 20s. And on the porch, I've never seen one this big before. I mentioned the Royal Order of the Jesters earlier.
Yeah.
The main symbol of the Royal Order of the Jesters is this character called the Billiken. And the Billiken is he's a little imp. He's a little smiling imp, almost like a Buddha kind of figure. But he's like a little elf or like a troll, like a mixture of an elf and a troll. And he has this plump belly, and he's kind of like sitting down. And they have these little tiny Billikens that they give out to the jesters. I've only ever seen like small ones, like maybe it would be on a necklace or something.
Yeah.
As we're driving around away from the parsonage, I said to my friend, I go, look, and on the porch of this house right across the street is this big Billiken. It was probably like 4 feet high.
Wow.
And I go, the people right across the street where Jack Parsons lived is obviously a jester. So I go, that they tried to get the house as close as possible to where the parsonage was, and that was probably like the closest house that was available.
Yeah, yeah.
So I took some photos of the Billiken. Anyway, then while we were there, I said, the house where John Carpenter shot Halloween, the Laurie Strode house, it is in Pasadena. The film is set in Haydenfield, Illinois, but they shot it in Pasadena. And Carpenter did a good job of making this Southern California city look like a little, town in Illinois. And so we drove over to the house where they shot Halloween, and it's within walking distance of the parsonage. I thought that was interesting. I don't know what that means, but I think it means something. I don't know what. But I just thought that was fascinating. You could walk from the place where Parsons blew himself up. You can walk over to the Halloween house. Anyway, so I was doing all this research into Jack Parsons, and of course, Parsons was like the hidden ground of 40s, 50s Southern California history. He's made several like high-profile pop culture appearances, in recent years. but he's still kind of this obscure figure.
Yeah.
And in fact, my wife's stepdad had his father, who only recently passed away at the age of 101.
Wow.
He was deeply involved in the early years of the space program. And eventually he became vice president of Rocketdyne. And I went to his 100th birthday party up in wine country up north. And he even wrote a memoir called I'll Push You Steer. That was all about his days working at Rocketdyne. And I once asked him about Jack Parsons, and he had no idea who I was talking about.
Wow.
I mean, he created, the solid rocket fuel that got us to the moon, but he did not know who Jack Parsons was. And you might say, well, he was 100, but he was actually very sharp. I mean, despite his advanced years,
Right.
he might as well have been 50 years old,
Well, I think Parsons was marginalized because of the magic and the sex magic and all the other controversial stuff he was into.
Oh, yeah. It's not something you'd probably want to advertise if you're JPL. And I even remember back in 1999, I gave a lecture at the Midnight Special bookstore on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. And there was this elderly political activist in the audience who got very irate when I mentioned that Jack Parsons had co-founded Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Really?
And this guy in the audience he had once worked for JPL. And he goes, if that were true, I would have heard about it. And I like I said, JPL doesn't want to advertise their connections to Parsons. And I mean, maybe they're a little bit more open about it now than they were. But you don't really want to advertise the guy who got us to the moon was a ceremonial magician who was, doing sex orgies on Millionaire's Row.
And a follower of Crowley.
And his connections to L. Ron Hubbard, that doesn't help either.
Yeah.
But in the 40s and 50s, when Parsons was still alive, he was a tremendous influence particularly on science fiction. And in 42, Anthony Boucher, who was the first editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which is still being published to this day, he wrote a novel called Rocket to the Morgue, in which the main character is based on Parsons. And in 1960, Phil Dick wrote a novel called Dr. Futurity. And again, the main character was based on Parsons. And a very young Ray Bradbury met Jack Parsons in the late 30s. And Bradbury told George Pendle, who was Parsons' biographer, he wrote the book Strange Angel.
Oh, yeah.
Bradbury told him that Parsons had a tremendous impact on him. And he saw Parsons lecture at the LOSFA, the Los Angeles Science Fiction League, on May 1st, 1938, so May Day. And Bradbury would have been 18 at the time, just out of high school, I think, or maybe just about to graduate from high school. And Parsons really would only have been about 6 or 7 years older than Bradbury at that point. It's weird to think that if Parsons had lived a normal lifespan, he might have been alive in the 21st century.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2004, he would have been 90. Like I just said, I was at this guy's birthday party. He was 100.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, conceivably, Parsons would have been 100 in 2014. So, it's kind of weird to think of like Jack Parsons still like tooling around.
Yeah. What else might he have come up with in that time too?
It's very strange to think about that. But Bradbury was, he said he was fascinated by this kind of dashing young Howard Hughes type who was a scientist, but he was talking about all the crazy stuff that Bradbury dreamed about, as a kid, going into outer space, going to the moon, which was just crazy talk at the time.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Harlan Ellison, the late short story writer Harlan Ellison, talking about when he was in these science fiction clubs when he was a teenager, some local journalist in Ohio came out to cover the club and wrote this really derisive article making fun of these kind of nerdy kids who thought we could go to the moon. And they quoted Harlan Ellison saying, I think we're going to go into outer space in 10 years. And this journalist wrote this kind of derisive article. Well, later when Sputnik went up, Harlan Ellison actually cut out, he still had the newspaper article. He framed it and physically went to the newspaper office to give it to the journalist who had written this article way back when he was a teenager. And he said he got to the office and he was pleased to discover the journalist had the good sense to die before Harlan Ellison could get there. So, I mean, this was typical, people talking about going to the moon, in 1936, 38. And Bradbury was very impressed by here's a scientist talking about this and a guy who kind of understood science fiction too.
Yeah.
And so Bradbury was fascinated by this, and he even spoke to Parsons after the lecture. And he said he was actually a little afraid of Parsons because Parsons was this, in his mind, this great accomplished scientist, and Bradbury was just this lowly newsboy who was not going to college or anything, and he had no way of ever joining Caltech where Parsons worked. But Bradbury couldn't have known that Parsons almost had no credentials himself. He just had the know-how. And
he had the brain for it.
It is clear that this encounter with Parsons had some impact on Bradbury because he remembered it vividly when talking to Pendleton, just a few years before Bradbury died in 2012. And Parsons dies in 1952, and Bradbury's first book, Dark Carnival, comes out in 1947, and The Martian Chronicles comes out in 1950, and I think The Illustrated Man came out a year after that. So it's intriguing to think that Parsons could have maybe read Martian Chronicles or The Illustrated Man. But Parsons' dramatic death makes headlines in June of 1952. And that was the same time that Bradbury began writing his first screenplay, It Came from Outer Space.
Okay.
So it seems to me that Parsons' death would have had some impact on Bradbury. He definitely would have seen this, in the news. And so it's my theory that the main character of It Came from Outer Space, John Putnam, JP, was based or inspired by Jack Parsons. Because it Came from Outer Space has several firsts. It's the first film to feature the scientist as the hero. Before that, if you were a scientist, you were like Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff, and you were like a lunatic, or you were a kind of a nerdy schlub with glasses, who couldn't get the girl. And so in It Came from Outer Space, you have the main character is this ruggedly handsome scientist who does not wear glasses. He seems, athletic. He has he's got a gorgeous fiance. He's described in the film as an outsider, as a guy he thinks for himself, and he's kind of like an outsider in this town. He starts going around telling people there are these aliens and they've landed. There are these beings from outer space. They're walking among us, and everyone thinks he's crazy. And the beings, which are called xenomorphs in the screenplay, were then later appropriated by the Aliens franchise. Right. These xenomorphs, they can shapeshift, and they can turn into human beings. They're doppelgangers. Yeah. And and there's an intimation they can travel through telephone wires like electricity and take on the form of human beings. And so, in a way, the aliens in It Came from Outer Space, they behave more like elementals. Or like interdimensional spirits, the kind that Parsons and Hubbard were trying to summon in 1946. And as I said, they're not called aliens in the screenplay. They're called xenomorphs. Strange morph, meaning they can transform their bodies into non-physical states. And so there's a lot of similarities between Bradbury's xenomorphs and the creatures that inhabit the Black Lodge in David Lynch and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. And of course, Jack Parsons and Marjorie Cameron are both, and L. Ron Hubbard, are explicitly characters in Mark Frost's novel, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. And you can definitely see blatant references to Parsons and Marjorie Cameron, particularly in season 3 of Twin Peaks. It came from all, I
was going to say, we are out of time. But we can continue this on a Patreon, so don't lose your place.
Okay, I will try to remember where I was.
But tell people where they can get the new book.
You can get Hollywood Haunts the World from headpress.com, directly from the publisher, or from Amazon. The Upside Down Magician, my comic book that's coming out, if you go to cryptoschatology.com, my website, I will be posting where you can order the first issue of The Upside Down Magician as well.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show would be hard to sustain. So thank you all. And a special shout out to the patrons pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Cherry Trapezoid, Tactical Therapist, John Blackburn, Matt in Delaware, Mark Smith, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Critter 80, Gantic, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Sean Cosgrove, Matthew Sproul, Ruth Fortescue, Andrew Nichols, Martha, Tyler Glimstead, Christine, Mothman Bren, Mark Brady, Patricia Gaia Quinta, Kevin Schreck, Linz Jackson K, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Charles Davis, Kristen L, Giotto, Riker and Stark, Abby Allen, Bright Rectangle, Eric Citron, Kevin, American Rambler, Sam Sharon, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Eric Todd, Ann Witowski, Vincent Trewell, Will Powell, Barbara Fisher, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Jay, MTK, History and Coffee, Diane B., Beverly Williamson, Jim and Sophie, Jonathan Frost, Victoria, John Bracken, Paul Jeffries, Janet's Planet, Ron Dupre, Laser Printer Jam, Perry Peters, Varosh K, MJ Armstrong, Jack Huntington, Lauren McLean, Stacy Sherwood, James Lindsay, Billuminati, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Mark Shoemaker, Ron Dupre, Will Cherry, Seed Person, The Ghost Story Guys, Liam Huddock, Harold, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Craig Sagastumi, Colin Karras, Matthew Brown, and Paul Guile Simpson. Thank you all so very, very much. All right, and Guffey and I continue talking in a Patreon segment for a while. And if you're not a patron, you can help out greatly by becoming one. It's only $3 a month. It's only ever been $3 a month for, man, I don't even know how long, a decade now? I have not raised the price because I want you to have the content. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff up there. Give it a shot, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with just how much stuff you can watch and listen to on the site. Just go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the big Patreon link. And, yeah, that's all I got for you this week, so see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is brought to you in part by our Patreons. You can find more at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. Website designed by John Tudor. The intro for this show was reimagined by Andrew Ham, a.k.a. Lord Happis on Spotify. And the voice is Psyche Kamir of Psyche Corporation. Artwork for the show designed by Timothy Renner, Jeff Ritzman, and Nadim Mahibahi. General inquiries, comments, etc. can be directed to contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Thank you all for listening and for all the support. www.wheredidtheroadgo.com.